Some deaths are tragic, some are shocking, but others are just downright baffling. In this video, we'll explore 5 more real stories of people who tragically lost their lives in unusual and unexpected ways. These are the kinds of deaths that make you shake your head and wonder, what were they thinking? Stick around to find out how these bizarre accidents happened. It was a quiet Saturday evening on December 6, 2009, in the small town of Konotop, Ukraine. Vladimir Likonos, a 25-year-old chemistry student, was at home working at his computer. His parents were nearby, enjoying a peaceful evening. Vladimir had always been passionate about chemistry. Since he was a child, he had been fascinated by the mysteries of science, particularly math, physics, and chemistry. His love for these subjects led him to study at a regional branch of the Kiev Polytechnic Institute, one of the most prestigious technical universities in Ukraine. He had dreams of becoming a scientist, and his time at university had only fueled his curiosity and ambition. Vladimir was known to be a quiet and level-headed young man. He spent most of his free time experimenting with various chemicals, often making homemade firecrackers. It was a hobby that reflected both his knowledge and passion for chemistry. But on this particular evening, something went horribly wrong. Vladimir had a peculiar habit. He liked to chew gum, but not just any gum. He had a habit of dipping it into citric acid. This was something he did regularly to prolong the gum's flavor. On this night, as he sat at his computer, he reached for his usual dose of citric acid to dip his gum into. But unbeknownst to Vladimir, he made a fatal mistake. On the table next to him were 2 containers. One contained citric acid as usual. The other contained a substance that looked very similar to citric acid, but it was something far more dangerous. Vladimir had been working with explosives for his studies, and on this night, he had some of the explosive powder on the table. In the dim light, or perhaps out of sheer habit, Vladimir dipped his gum into the wrong container. A loud explosion shattered the peaceful silence of the night. The sound was so loud that it could be heard throughout the house. Vladimir's mother, who was in another room, rushed to her son's room, only to find a horrifying scene. Vladimir was lying on the floor, his face bloodied and disfigured. The lower half of his face, including his entire jaw, had been blown off. It was a gruesome sight that even experienced police officers would later describe as one of the most shocking scenes they had ever encountered. Emergency services were called immediately. When the medical workers arrived, they tried to save Vladimir, but his injuries were far too severe. There was nothing they could do. Vladimir was dead. The police arrived shortly after. They quickly began to investigate what had happened. On Vladimir's work table, they found about 100 grams of a powder that resembled citric acid. But it wasn't citric acid. It was an explosive substance. The police realized that Vladimir had accidentally dipped his chewing gum into the explosive powder, mistaking it for citric acid. The scene was so disturbing that even the most experienced officers were shaken. They had seen many things in their careers, but nothing quite like this. A bomb squad was dispatched to the scene to determine the exact nature of the explosive substance. The powder was deemed too volatile to move, so the bomb squad had to carefully neutralize it on site. As the investigation continued, more details about Vladimir's life emerged. His friends and classmates described him as a brilliant student who was deeply passionate about his studies. He was home for the holidays, having just finished his semester exams. During this time, he spent most of his days at home, either on his computer or working on his experiments. Vladimir's parents were devastated by the loss of their son. They had always known about his passion for chemistry, but they never imagined it would lead to such a tragic accident. The town of Konotop was also in shock. News of the accident spread quickly, and people couldn't believe that something so terrible could happen in their quiet town. The authorities conducted further tests on the unknown substance found at the scene. They wanted to be sure of what had caused the explosion. The tests confirmed that the substance was indeed an explosive, though its exact composition remained unidentified. It was clear that Vladimir had made a fatal mistake, one that cost him his life. Vladimir was buried in the Alexandrovka Cemetery in Sumy, Ukraine, not far from where he had grown up. A single photograph of him remains on his Find a Grave memorial, capturing the image of a young man who had so much potential, a life full of promise that was suddenly and violently ended. It was 1995 in Poland, and a tragic and bizarre event occurred that left the entire country stunned. Krzysztof Ozniński, a 30-year-old farmer, lost his life in a shocking attempt to prove his manliness. Krzysztof was known in his village as a strong and hard-working man. He spent most of his days tending to his farm, doing the tough physical labor that defined his life. Like many men in his community, Krzysztof enjoyed spending his evenings with friends, sharing drinks, and talking about life. On one cold winter night, what began as a normal gathering among friends turned into something much darker. That evening, Krzysztof and his friends met in a small barn on his property. The group was drinking heavily, and as the night wore on, their conversation took a dangerous turn. It wasn't unusual for them to play what they called men's games, but these games were far from harmless. They were competitive, risky, and fueled by a need to prove who was the toughest among them. The night started with the men hitting each other on the head with frozen turnips. It was painful, but in their minds it was a test of strength and endurance. Laughter echoed through the barn, but underneath it there was a tension, a silent competition that no one wanted to lose. They were driven by pride, each man trying to show he could take more pain than the others. But things took a terrifying turn when one of Krzysztof's friends decided to up the stakes. He grabbed a chainsaw that had been lying around and in a shocking move, cut off the end of his own foot. The barn fell silent as the reality of what he had done sank in. Blood poured from his wound, but instead of stopping the madness, it seemed to urge the others to do more. Krzysztof, feeling the pressure not to be outdone, made a decision that would cost him his life. In his drunken state, he believed he had to prove that he was even tougher than his friend. He took the chainsaw, looked at his friends, and shouted, "Watch this then!" With those words, he swung the chainsaw at his own head. The scene that followed was horrifying. The chainsaw cut through Krzysztof's neck, severing his head from his body. He died instantly, his body collapsing to the ground as his friends watched in shock and disbelief. The reality of what had just happened hit them hard. Their friend was dead, and nothing could bring him back. The news of Krzysztof Ozniński's death quickly spread beyond the village. People couldn't believe the lengths he had gone to in order to prove his manhood. It reminds us of how dangerous it can be when pride and alcohol mix. Krzysztof's story became widely known, and it wasn't long before it was included in a study published in the British Medical Journal. This study looked at people who had died in foolish ways and found that the majority were men. The researchers suggested that men are often more willing to take unnecessary risks to prove themselves, especially when alcohol is involved. Krzysztof's death was also mentioned in connection with the Darwin Awards, a darkly humorous honor given to people who die in the most foolish ways, effectively removing themselves from the gene pool. His story stood out as one of the most extreme examples of toxic masculinity and the deadly consequences it can have. Looking back at what happened that night, it's impossible not to wonder what could have been different. What if Krzysztof and his friends hadn't been drinking so much? What if someone had stopped the games before they got out of hand? Could Krzysztof's life have been saved if someone had intervened? These questions don't have easy answers, but they remind us of the importance of making better choices and looking out for each other. Krzysztof Ozniński's death is a tragic example of how a desire to prove one's manliness can lead to disaster. It's a story that forces us to think about the pressures men face to appear tough and how dangerous those pressures can be. In the end, no amount of pride is worth the cost of a life. On May 15, 2011, 20-year-old Acton Beale from Brisbane, Australia, tragically lost his life while participating in the internet craze called planking. Planking is a trend where people lie face down in unusual or risky places while someone takes a photo, which is then shared online. The more dangerous or unusual the location, the more attention the photo receives. That night, Acton and a friend were returning home after a night out. Acton decided to try planking on the railing of his apartment's balcony. This railing was only 5 centimeters wide, making it extremely dangerous. As he attempted to lie down on the railing, he lost his balance and fell 7 stories to the ground. Despite the efforts of paramedics who tried to revive him for 20 minutes, Acton was pronounced dead at the scene. The incident shocked the community and led to widespread media coverage. Deputy Police Commissioner Ross Barnett confirmed that Acton had been drinking before the accident. He also stated that planking itself wasn't the issue, but doing it in dangerous places like a high balcony was extremely risky. Barnett pointed out that while planking on a park bench might be harmless, trying it on a narrow ledge high above the ground could be fatal. Following Acton's death, police and government officials issued warnings about the dangers of planking. Queensland police, for example, warned that those caught planking in dangerous locations or on private property could face legal consequences. They emphasized that while planking might seem like harmless fun, the risks involved in extreme cases were too high. Acton's death also sparked a heated debate online, especially on social media. A Facebook page created in his memory was flooded with comments, both in support of and against the trend. Some people expressed their condolences and remembered Acton as a fun-loving young man, while others criticized planking and those who encouraged it. The situation became so tense that the page's comments section had to be shut down after people began posting defamatory remarks and even sharing a video mocking Acton's death. The video was later removed from YouTube. The tragedy also caught the attention of Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard, who described the incident as really tragic. She emphasized the need for people to think about their safety first before engaging in risky behavior, even if it's just for fun. Acton's death was believed to be the first planking-related fatality in Australia, and it raised concerns that it might not be the last. As more people attempted to outdo each other with increasingly dangerous stunts, authorities feared that there would be more injuries or deaths. The Queensland Police even issued a general warning on their Facebook page, cautioning people about the potential dangers of planking as it gained popularity. Despite the warnings, the planking trend continued to grow. The Planking Australia Facebook page, which had over 55,000 followers before Acton's death, saw a surge in popularity, reaching over 87,000 followers shortly after the incident. The page featured photos of people planking in various locations, from park benches to railway tracks, and even on top of police cars. Before Acton's death, another 20-year-old man from Queensland had been arrested for planking on a police car. He was charged with trespassing, and authorities warned that similar stunts could result in fines or even jail time. They also emphasized that while people might see planking as a fun activity, they needed to be aware of the risks and the potential consequences of their actions. Acton's death shows the dangers associated with internet trends that encourage risky behavior. While planking might have started as a harmless game, it quickly escalated into something much more dangerous as people pushed the limits to gain attention online. In August 2014, a chef named Peng Fan, who worked in Foshan, Guangdong province in China, tragically died in an unusual way. Peng was preparing a dish that included the meat of an Indo-Chinese spitting cobra, a snake known for its deadly venom. This dish is considered a delicacy in some parts of Asia. That day, Peng had already severed the snake's head and was busy preparing the rest of its body to cook a soup. The snake's head was set aside as Peng focused on his work. About 20 minutes later, Peng went to throw the snake's head into the trash, thinking it was no longer dangerous. But to his shock, the severed head suddenly bit his hand, injecting him with venom. The venom of the Indo-Chinese spitting cobra is extremely powerful. It contains neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing paralysis and eventually stopping the victim from breathing. In Peng's case, the venom started affecting him almost immediately. He had no time to react or get help before his respiratory system began to shut down. The diners in the restaurant were enjoying their meals, unaware of what was happening in the kitchen. But then they heard loud screams and a lot of noise coming from the back. Restaurant guest Lin's son, who was there celebrating his wife's birthday, later described the chaos. "We were eating when suddenly there was a lot of noise. We didn't know what was going on but could hear people screaming from the kitchen." Realizing something was terribly wrong, the restaurant staff called for a doctor. Unfortunately, by the time medical help arrived, it was too late. Peng Fan had already died from the venom. The speed at which the venom worked left little time for anyone to save him, and without anti-venom, there was nothing that could be done. A police spokesman described the event as a highly unusual case, explaining that once the venom took hold, there was no chance of saving Peng's life. Only the anti-venom could have helped, but it wasn't given in time. It was just a tragic accident. Experts later explained how this could happen. Yang Hong Chang, a snake expert with 40 years of experience, said that reptiles, including snakes, can still move for a short time after their body parts are removed, or even after they are decapitated. When a snake's head is cut off, it's technically dead because its basic body functions stop, but reflexes can still happen, he said. This means that even after being killed, the snake's head can still bite and inject venom, which is exactly what happened to Peng. The Indo-Chinese spitting cobra, the type of snake Peng was handling, is especially dangerous because of its venomous bite and its ability to spit venom with great accuracy. This snake's venom can cause severe damage and even death, as seen in Peng's case. Despite being decapitated, the snake's reflexes allowed it to bite and kill Peng, showing just how dangerous these creatures can be even after death. In some parts of Asia, snake meat is believed to have health benefits, and it is often used in traditional medicine. In Guangdong province, where Peng worked, snake meat has been eaten for centuries and is considered a delicacy. It is believed to cure various ailments and strengthen the body. This belief, however, doesn't eliminate the very real dangers involved in preparing and consuming such dangerous animals. The restaurant where Peng worked was left in shock after his death. The diners who were there that day will likely never forget the tragedy that unfolded in the kitchen. What began as an ordinary meal ended with the sudden loss of a life. On March 24, 1975, Alex Mitchell, a 50-year-old bricklayer from Kings Lynn, Norfolk, had a day like any other. After finishing work, he came home for dinner, eager to relax in front of the TV. His favorite show, The Goodies, was on that night. The episode was titled Kung Fu Capers, a comedy sketch that promised a lot of laughs. The Goodies was a popular British comedy show, known for its silly and sometimes bizarre humor. That night's episode featured a scene where a character dressed as a Scotsman used bagpipes as a weapon in a mock martial arts fight against another character wielding a black pudding. The scene was absurd and hilarious, and Alex found it incredibly funny. As he sat in his living room, he started to laugh, and he kept laughing. Minutes passed, and Alex's laughter didn't stop. He laughed for 25 minutes straight, unable to control himself. His laughter echoed through the house, and his wife Nessie watched in surprise. But then something went terribly wrong. As Alex let out one last laugh, he suddenly collapsed on the sofa. His laughter had stopped, and so had his heart. Alex Mitchell died that evening from heart failure, right there in his living room. The doctors believed that his uncontrollable laughter had triggered a heart attack or stroke. It was an unbelievable way to go, and his story quickly made headlines. The idea that someone could die from laughing seemed almost impossible, yet it had happened. In the days following Alex's death, his widow Nessie reached out to the cast of The Goodies. Despite the tragedy, she wanted to thank them for making her husband's final moments so joyful. She wrote them a letter expressing her gratitude for the laughter they brought into his life. For years, Alex Mitchell's death was a mystery. It wasn't until 37 years later that a possible explanation emerged. In May 2012, Alex's granddaughter, Lisa Cork, suffered a near-fatal cardiac arrest at the age of 23. She was put into a medically induced coma, and after extensive testing, doctors diagnosed her with long QT syndrome. Long QT syndrome is a genetic disorder that affects the heart's electrical activity. It can cause sudden irregular heartbeats, which can lead to fainting, seizures, or even sudden death. The syndrome is often triggered by intense emotions or physical exertion. In Lisa's case, it was likely the cause of her cardiac arrest. Given Lisa's diagnosis, doctors began to re-examine Alex Mitchell's death. They suspected that he too might have had long QT syndrome, which would explain why his heart failed during a fit of laughter. The condition can be inherited, so it's possible that the gene was passed down through the family. This new information brought some clarity to the Mitchell family. It also prompted them to get tested for the syndrome to prevent any future tragedies. Lisa was fitted with an internal cardiac defibrillator to help regulate her heartbeat, and other family members were tested to see if they carried the same gene. While Alex Mitchell's death remains one of the strangest in medical history, it is also a reminder of how fragile life can be. Laughter is usually a good thing, but in rare cases it can be deadly, especially for those with underlying health conditions.